Rain came down like needles, sharp and fast, slicing through the thick clouds above the valley. The river that cut through the land, usually gentle and shallow, had turned violent in a matter of minutes. Thunder rolled over the hills as 6 native children, ages ranging from 7 to 12, ran along the muddy bank, laughing, chasing one another despite the first warning drops. Their laughter was swallowed by the wind, and the earth trembled beneath them as lightning cracked across the sky. What began as innocent play quickly became a nightmare. Without warning, a wall of water surged from upstream, fed by unseen rainstorms. In the mountains, the current struck with the force of a wild beast. Trees snapped, mud collapsed into the riverbed. One child slipped first, a girl in a red hoodie, her scream piercing through the air as she was pulled into the torrent. The others tried to grab her, but the current was merciless. In seconds, all 6 were swept off their feet, their small bodies tossed like driftwood. The nearest adult was too far to help, shouting in vain as he stumbled over roots and rocks toward the chaos. One of the children hit her head on a submerged log. The situation was no longer dangerous, it was fatal then. Through the rain and roaring current, something moved against the water. A black figure galloped down the hill, slick with rain, its muscles gleaming with power under the stormy sky. It was a horse, wild, massive, untethered. Without hesitation, it plunged into the raging river. Its hooves churned through the current, pushing toward the children. A bystander, still frozen in place from fear, raised his phone with trembling hands and hit record. The animal moved like it knew exactly what it was doing, ignoring the chaos around it. The horse reached the first child, barely conscious, slipping beneath the surface. With a swift motion, it pushed her upward with its body, guiding her toward a shallow bend. Then it turned back, snorting against the wind. It went for the next one. 2 of the older boys clung to its sides as it maneuvered them toward safety. It didn't panic, it didn't falter. The storm howled, but the black horse moved like something out of legend, defying the river's fury. The man filming kept whispering to himself, "It's not real, that's not real." But the footage captured every second. All 6 children were dragged or nudged toward shallow ground, coughing and crying, mud covering their faces. Some had bruises. One had a deep cut above her eyebrow, but they were alive. The horse didn't linger, it stood in the shallows for a second, water up to its chest, steam rising off its body despite the cold. Then, as if pulled by instinct, it turned its head slowly. On the ridge above, between the jagged silhouettes of pine trees, stood a lone gray wolf, silent, still watching. No one had seen it arrive. It didn't growl or pace, it simply watched, its yellow eyes locked on the horse below. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the horse snorted and looked away, beginning its climb back up the riverbank. The wolf remained unmoving until the rain softened to a drizzle. Then it disappeared into the trees like smoke. The rescued children were rushed home. Emergency services arrived. No one believed the first witness who mentioned the wolf, but the video of the horse that went online within the hour. By nightfall, the footage had been viewed over 2 million times. News outlets called it a miracle, some dubbing the horse a hero, others claiming it was a trained rescue animal. But no tags, no harness, no brand was found. No ranchers in the region had reported a missing black stallion, and the man who filmed the video refused interviews, shaken to the core. That wasn't a regular horse, he told his brother, and that thing on the hill, it wasn't just a wolf either. They came together. Meanwhile, deep inside the reservation, an old man lit sage over a stone bowl, whispering in Lakota under his breath. He had heard the storm, he had felt it in his chest before it came, and when he saw the video, he did not smile. "It has begun again," he said quietly, staring into the smoke as it curled upward, just like the last time. Outside his window, somewhere far off in the trees, a wolf howled, one long, low note, and the land seemed to hold its breath. The room was dim lit only by the flicker of an old lamp and the bluish glow of Eli Mercer's laptop screen. He sat motionless at his worn kitchen table, boots still muddy from morning chores. Rain tapped lightly against the windows now, a calm contrast to the footage he watched on loop. The black horse emerged again and again from the flood, powerful and deliberate, guiding the children like it had done it before. Eli's jaw clenched as the camera panned to the ridge, pausing briefly on the figure of the wolf. That was when his expression changed. He leaned closer, rewinding the clip with trembling fingers. The resolution was shaky, grainy, but he didn't need clarity. He knew the shape of that animal, the way it stood, the way it waited. Eli whispered, "It's back," and sat back in his chair, running a hand down his weathered face. His calloused fingers tapped the wooden table rhythmically, the same way he used to do when nervous as a boy. His lips moved again, barely audible. "That's not just any damn horse either." He rose slowly, bones stiff from years of work and silence. He hadn't spoken to the tribal chief in over a decade, not since they buried Jonas's father. But he reached for the landline mounted on the wall and dialed the number he never truly forgot. It rang only once. A deep voice answered, calm but wary. Eli didn't wait for greetings. "It's me," he said. "I saw the video." A pause followed. "Yes," Eli continued, voice lower now. "We need to talk tonight." The line clicked off. Outside, Eli stepped onto the porch, staring into the dusk. The hills rolled in the distance like quiet giants, and the scent of wet earth lingered thick in the air. His old dog, Rusty, sat beside him but didn't bark. He hadn't barked since the storm. The rancher scanned the ridge across the fields, his eyes drawn instinctively to the tree line. For a brief second, he thought he saw something move between the pines, not a figure, just a shadow. But it was enough. Back inside, Eli dug through a chest in the corner of the room. He pulled out a folded, faded photograph nearly split down the center. It showed two boys and a horse. One of the boys was Eli, maybe 15. The other, Jonas, smiled, wide arm around a younger foal. In the distance of the photo, if you looked closely, was the same silhouette, a dark wolf at the edge of the woods. Most people thought it was a smudge. Eli knew better. He held the photo tight and closed his eyes. He hadn't spoken of that day in 40 years. The fire, the run through the forest, the sound of hooves beside him and fur brushing against his back. They were saved back then. But worn to pact made hastily and in fear beneath a tree scorched by lightning. The elder had told them if the guardians ever returned, it meant the balance was broken. Eli had dismissed it, buried it under decades of fence mending and cattle work. Until now, his phone buzzed once on the table. A message from Chief Red Elk. Meet me at the old smokehouse. Bring the photo. Eli grabbed his coat, stuffed the photo into his inside pocket, and whistled low for Rusty to stay. He drove through the dirt roads as twilight fell, dust and rain mixing on the windshield. His mind churned. It wasn't just the horse, and it wasn't just the wolf. It was what they meant. They didn't come for no reason. Someone had disturbed the land again. That as he reached the hilltop and saw the dim lantern light by the smokehouse, a tightness grew in his chest. Not fear, not yet, but something close to recognition. Like the land had awakened from a long sleep and its eyes were open again. Eli stepped out of the truck, boots sinking into the wet earth. The old wooden building creaked as the wind passed through it. And from inside, a voice called out softly, "You took long enough, Mercer." The past had come calling, and this time, it wasn't waiting. The children sat wrapped in blankets inside the tribal community center, their cheeks still flushed from the cold and their clothes damped from the river. Parents hovered nearby, speaking softly to medics and elders. A woman from the local newspaper gently asked the oldest boy, Micah, what he remembered. He hesitated at first, then said, "It had fire in its eyes. Not real fire, but like it knew what it was doing. It wasn't scared of anything." The others nodded quietly. None of them had seen anything like it before. A younger girl, Lila, clung to her mother's arm. When asked about the wolf, she didn't flinch. "It didn't scare me," she said, in a small voice. "It didn't growl or move. It was just ... there, watching, like it was making sure the horse got us all out." Her mother gave the reporter a sharp glance, silently asking her to stop. But the damage was done. The words that had taken root, whispers spread among the gathered families. Old stories once told at firesides were now being murmured under breath again. Elder Marlene, known for her quiet wisdom and careful words, was one of the first to voice concern. "The guardians don't appear for no reason," she said to Chief Red Elk, who stood nearby, arms crossed. "Something has shifted." She asked to be taken to the riverbank the next morning. At first light, a group of elders, including Marlene, made the silent walk through the damp trail, their steps careful, as though entering sacred ground. The place was still, but not silent. Near the roots of an old cottonwood tree, Marlene knelt. She ran her fingers along a patch of bark that had been split open. Etched just beneath the surface, barely visible, was a circle surrounded by 4 arrows, one pointing in each direction. It was a symbol she hadn't seen in nearly 50 years, one used by the ancestors to mark places of spiritual crossing. "This wasn't here last month," she murmured. "Someone or something is marking the land again." Nearby, more carvings were discovered. Spirals, paw prints, horseshoe shapes, some fresh, some faded. None of the children had carved them, and no one from the community admitted to it. The elders gathered in quiet discussion, tension mounting. Symbols like these hadn't been seen since the early 80s. Around the time of the forest fire that nearly took 2 boys, Marlene remembered that fire and remembered the name Eli Mercer, though she hadn't heard it in decades. Later that evening, Chief Red Elk met again with Eli outside the smokehouse. He showed him the photos taken of the carvings. Eli didn't speak for a long moment, then exhaled hard. "It's the same markings from that summer," he said. "Back then, no one believed us." The chief nodded. "But now there's proof, and kids nearly died." They both understood something deeper was unfolding, something that couldn't be dismissed as mere coincidence or weather. Back at the center, the children gathered crayons and drew what they had seen. Some sketched the black horse with wide, glowing eyes. Others drew the wolf, always standing above the river, never moving. But one child drew something different, a figure between the horse and the wolf, a tall shape, faceless, arms open wide. When asked who it was, the child simply said, "The one who tells them when to come." The drawing was placed on a shelf, but no one forgot it. That night, As the sky cleared and the moon rose full, Marlene lit a cedar bundle and prayed softly. The land, she believed, had a memory, and it was speaking again, through rivers, animals, and children. But what it was, saying what it was warning of, was still uncertain. The only thing she knew for sure was that the Guardians had returned, and that always came with a price. Eli rode out before dawn, the sky still a pale blue bruise above the hills. His horse, Boone, moved steady beneath him, hooves crunching over wet gravel as they followed the trail toward the riverbank. Mist clung low to the ground like breath held too long. Eli didn't speak. He hadn't slept, not really. The dreams had returned: smoke, fire, screams in the forest. As he approached the bend in the river where the children had been pulled from the current, something in his gut twisted. The air felt heavier here. Charged, he dismounted slowly, boots sinking slightly in the damp soil. The spot was still scattered, with debris from the flood-snapped branches, torn grass, and thick mud caked in strange patterns. And then he saw them. Hoofprints, deep and wide, leading from the water's edge into the trees. Not Boone's, not any local horse. He was sure of it. The prints were fresh, but somehow didn't match the chaos of the storm. They looked placed, deliberate, like the horse had walked not with panic, but with purpose. As he followed the trail into the underbrush, Eli's eyes caught something else: 3 long, clean claw marks raked across the bark of an old pine. He froze. The memory came fast and unwanted. 40 years ago, the same mark had been on another tree deeper in the woods, the night his brother Jacob vanished. They'd been young, reckless, cutting through tribal land during a thunderstorm. A fire had started wild fast, unexplainable, and only Eli had returned. The mark had burned itself into his memory. He touched the claw marks now, fingers brushing the grooves like reading a message in braille. Same width, same angle. No animal in these woods made that kind of cut, not with such precision. The bark around it wasn't just torn, it was blackened slightly, as if seared. He stepped back, heart thudding harder. Boone let out a soft whine. Behind him, something primal in both of them stirred. Eli turned slowly in a full circle, scanning the woods. Silence, but not peace. The kind of silence that listens. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the old photograph he'd carried since the night before. It was faded, creased from being folded too many times. 2 boys, 1 horse in the background, dark, wild, unmistakable. And if you looked close, far left in the shadow line of the trees, a figure with pointed ears and yellowed eyes. The wolf. Everyone had said it was just light, a trick of exposure. But Eli knew it was the same horse, the same wolf, and now they were back. He dropped to a knee and placed the photo on the ground next to one of the fresh hoofprints. The scale matched the same broad chest, same rounded edge to the print. This wasn't a descendant, it was the same animal. But how? How could it still be alive after 4 decades? Horses didn't live that long. Wolves didn't either, not unless... Eli shook his head and stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. He didn't believe in magic, but he did believe in memory. And the land remembered everything. He took a slow breath and turned toward the trees where the hoofprints disappeared. He didn't follow, not yet. Something told him this wasn't a trail to finish alone. Instead, he mounted Boone and rode back the way he came, heart heavy, mind racing. Back at the ranch, he dug deeper through his boxes of old things, maps, journals, notes scribbled by candlelight when the fire had burned and the wolf had first appeared. Patterns, places, a strange circle that never really closed. The last thing he pulled out was a folded page from an old book of tribal stories Jonas once gave him before everything went silent between them. On the edge of the page was a hand-drawn symbol, a circle with 4 arrows, the same one Marlene had found carved into the cottonwood tree. He stared at it, fingers trembling slightly. He knew then this wasn't just about the children or the storm. It was about something unfinished, something buried, rising again. And this time, there would be no running from it. The flames had torn through the dry grass like a living creature, snapping branches and hissing through the forest with unnatural speed. In the summer of 1985, Eli Mercer was just 16, old elbows and stubbornness, cutting across forbidden tribal land with his best friend, Jonas Red Elk. They'd ignored warnings from both families, wanting to explore a canyon they'd heard was haunted. But the wind shifted that day, and a lightning strike up north sent fire racing down into the valley before either of them knew they were trapped. Smoke choked their lungs as they ran, eyes burning, lungs screaming. Trees exploded behind them, in bursts of heat. Jonas stumbled over a root and Eli doubled back, hauling him to his feet just before a flaming branch crashed inches from their path. They didn't know where they were anymore. The trail was gone. Every direction looked like death. That's when Eli saw it through the smoke. Barely visible, a black horse standing perfectly still at the edge of a clearing, head high, unafraid of the fire. Beside the horse, as if summoned from the earth itself, stood a large gray wolf. Its fur was singed at the tips, but its eyes burned bright, watching them. Neither animal moved. For a split second, Eli froze. He thought it was a hallucination, something his brain made up in fear. But Jonas grabbed his arm and whispered, "We follow them." and the two boys did without question, stumbling after the pair as the wolf darted into the smoke and the horse galloped ahead, creating a narrow corridor of escape. They ran for what felt like hours, until they broke through a curtain of ash and found themselves in a small ravine, protected on all sides by rock. The fire didn't touch it. The air was clearer here, almost calm. They collapsed to the ground, coughing and shaking, their clothes soaked with sweat. When Eli looked up, the horse and the wolf were gone. Not a hoof print, not a paw print, just silence. Then, from the far side of the rocks, an old man appeared, Jonas's grandfather, the tribal elder. He had been waiting. The elder didn't yell. He didn't ask what they were doing. Instead, he knelt beside them and placed a hand on each of their foreheads, whispering in Lakota. Then he spoke in English, slow and firm. "You were shown the guardians," he said. "They do not come without purpose. They came because the land was about to burn." He looked directly at Eli. "You do not belong to this land, but it spared you. That means you now owe it something." The words stayed with Eli long after the smoke cleared that night. The boys returned to the clearing with the elder and carved a symbol into a cedar post circle. For arrows, it was a pact. "Protect the land," the elder had said, "and the guardians will protect you. But if it is betrayed, they will return, and they do not forget." Jonas took it seriously. Eli at the time thought it was poetic nonsense, but he'd made the mark, repeated the words, and as the years passed, he buried the memory under adulthood, cattle, fences, and silence. Jonas tried to remind him once, years later, after a developer came sniffing around tribal land. Eli waved him off, too focused on keeping his own ranch. Afloat, he hadn't seen the wolf or horse again, and assumed it had all been a dream fueled by smoke and fear. Their friendship frayed after that. Jonas left for a time, became quieter, less trusting. Eli didn't blame him, but he also didn't reach out. He had broken something and didn't know how to fix it, so he let it drift. Now, with the same horse and wolf returned, with the children saved and the symbols back on the trees, the weight of that forgotten pact settled like iron in Eli's chest. The guardians had come again, but this time, it wasn't for him. It was for the land, for the people. And maybe, just maybe, to remind him of the promise he had turned his back on. The kind of promise that lives not in memory, but in the very soil beneath your feet. The first black SUVs rolled into the valley 3 days after the video went viral. Clean, tinted, out of place among the dusty pickups and rusted tractors that dotted the reservation's roads. The men who stepped out wore tailored suits and friendly smiles, flashing thick folders and legal terms like they were handing out candy. Investment opportunity, they called it. Partnership, they promised. They wanted to buy several acres along the riverbank's land that had never been sold in generations. Some families listened. The money was tempting, more than most had seen in a lifetime. Promises of paved roads, new schools, jobs. Others, especially the elders, refused even to sit down. "You don't sell what watches over you," one said. But cracks began to show in the community. Younger members, burdened by poverty, saw it differently. Meetings turned tense. Old friendships strained. And in the middle of it all, the land waited silent, watching. Then the wolf came again. This time, not on the ridge, not near the river. It was seen walking slowly through the edge of the residential zone at dusk, just beyond the last trailer homes. Several people spotted it. No one heard it approach. It moved like fog, visible but untouchable. The children stayed indoors that night. A few elders left small offerings on their porches. Cornmeal, cedar, old beads. They remembered the stories, but what unsettled everyone wasn't the wolf's appearance, it was the way the animals reacted. The dogs didn't bark. Not one, not even the chained ones that howled at passing cars. They watched silently as the wolf passed, heads low, tails still. Chickens weren't taken. No cattle were harmed. Not a single hoof mark in the soft ground. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't afraid. It was simply there, as if to remind them it could be closer than they thought. That night, nobody slept well, and by morning, new survey flags had been planted near the bend in the river. Jonas returned that afternoon, stepping out of a dusty truck with his granddaughter Leela at his side. Word had reached him quickly. He hadn't spoken at council in months, but now he stood in the community hall and addressed the crowd. "This land has already been paid for," he said. "In blood, in stories, in memory. If you trade it for money, you will lose more than space, you'll lose protection." Some nodded, others avoided his eyes. Outside, storm clouds gathered. Again, Eli sat in the back, arms crossed, silent. He hadn't spoken publicly since the fire all those years ago, but now the threads of his past were pulling tight. He looked at Jonas, saw the weight in his friend's shoulders, and knew they stood on the edge of something old returning. It wasn't just a land deal, it was a fracture, a test. And the guardians weren't just watching, they were warning. By sunset, rumors spread of a second sighting. A ranch hand, driving home alone, had seen both the horse and the wolf near the tree line outside the developer's temporary trailer. He stopped his truck and tried to film, but the phone malfunctioned. Screen, no signal. The trailer's generator shorted out that night, though no wires were touched. The next morning, the men in suits looked more cautious, avoiding eye contact. One of them left early quietly. In the coming days, the division deepened. Arguments erupted at council. Some accused others of holding the tribe back with superstition. Others feared what selling would bring. But every night, as tension grew, the wolf returned, always silent, always present. It never crossed the fences. It didn't need to. Its message was clear. The land was awake, and it did not sleep through betrayal. Jonas stood at the edge of the council circle, his weathered hands resting on the back of a cedar chair. The room had gone quiet the moment he entered. Years had passed since he'd spoken publicly, his voice once central, now almost myth among the younger generation. His long braids were streaked with gray, and his eyes, sharp as ever, held the weight of memory. He didn't raise his voice, didn't ask permission. He simply began to speak. "They don't come unless something is wrong," he said. "You all know that." His gaze swept across the room, settling briefly on Eli, who stood near the doorway, hat in hand. "The Guardians are not legends. They are warnings made flesh," Jonas continued. "We used to understand that. We used to live with that knowledge, not beneath it." Some of the elders nodded slowly. A few younger men exchanged uncertain glances. The tension that had haunted the valley since the flood now had a name. Something deeper than business deals or tribal politics. A spiritual imbalance had returned. Then Jonas said something that made Eli's chest tighten. "One of the children," he said, pausing, "is my granddaughter." Murmurs rippled through the room. Leela, the girl who had described the wolf, without fear. For 3 weeks before the flood, she had dreams, Jonas said. Always the same, a black horse standing in the water, and a shadow watching from the hills. He looked up. She'd never seen that horse before, and yet she knew it. Eli took a step forward, slow, hesitant. "Dreams aren't accidents," he said, voice low. "Not in this land." Jonas met his eyes, the unspoken history between them stirring like dust in an old barn. "No," Jonas replied. "They're invitations or warnings. We remember what we saw, what we promised. This is no different. The land is speaking again, and it's doing so through our children." Silence settled again, but this time it was charged, purposeful. After the meeting, Eli and Jonas walked together beneath the broad night sky, the stars distant and cold. They didn't speak at first. The sounds of insects and far-off coyotes filled the space between them. Finally, Eli said, "I never forgot what happened. I just tried to live around it." Jonas stopped walking. "And now it's come back around you," he said. "Full circle." He glanced toward the hills. The wolf didn't come for no reason, neither did the horse. Back at Jonas's modest house, Lila sat at the kitchen table, drawing with quiet focus. When Jonas stepped inside, she held up a new picture. It showed the black horse standing in front of a line of homes, facing a wall of flame. The wolf was behind it, not beside it, watching, protecting. She pointed at the fire. "It's not fire from lightning," she said softly. "It's from machines." Eli's stomach turned. The developers, the river, the strange silence before the storm. It all connected. Later that night, Jonas brought out the old cedar box that had once belonged to his grandfather. Inside were notes, carvings, and a small bundle of sage wrapped in red cloth. He unwrapped it and placed it on the table. "My grandfather called them watchers," he said. "Not spirits, not ghosts, watchers. They only step between when we've gone too far." He looked at Eli this time. "They're not just watching for us, they're watching what we do next." Eli stared at the bundle in silence. The past wasn't behind them, it was underneath everything, woven into the roots of the land and now rising again. He felt the weight of the old pact settle in his chest like a stone. He had ignored it for too long. Now, the Guardians were awake, the land was stirring, and a child had seen the truth before anyone else. There were no more doubts, only choices. Eli sat at his cluttered desk. Papers and maps spread around like a battlefield. The viral video had brought attention, but what unsettled him most was what he uncovered late into the night. The development. The company wasn't just any investor. Behind the glossy brochures and polite suits lurked a giant corporation with a shadowed past, one tied to illegal mining operations and water diversion projects in other states. Names he'd read in newspapers about environmental scandals appeared again, linked directly to the new proposal. The land was under threat far deeper than anyone realized. He traced the company's permits, focusing on the upstream area feeding the river that had nearly drowned the children. The documents showed recent blasting permits approved under false pretenses labeled as soil testing for agricultural research. But Eli knew the sound of blasts, the shaking earth under his feet. That wasn't research. That was destruction. The sudden flash flood that swept the kids into the water wasn't nature's whimsy. It was a man-made disaster waiting to happen. Met with Chief Red Elk and Jonas the next morning, spreading out the documents on the council table. "They've been tampering with the river," Eli said grimly. "Blasting rocks, diverting water to dry out areas for mining. That flood was no accident." Jonas shook his head, eyes dark. "It's the land they want, but what they're after is the resources underneath. They don't care about the river, the people, or the Guardians." The elders listened, the room thick with worry and anger. The threat was no longer just spiritual, it was concrete, legal, and deadly. Word spread fast. and soon the community was divided between those who wanted to fight and those tempted by the money's promise. Protests formed near the riverbanks, while bulldozers idled in the background, engines off but ready. But every time the development crews moved closer, sightings of the horse and wolf grew more frequent. Some said it was a warning, others whispered that the land itself was rising up against the invaders. Eli knew the truth was somewhere between legend and reality. Late one night, Eli drove to the river to check the blasting sites. The air was thick with the smell of disturbed earth and crushed stone. He saw fresh scars on the hills, where explosives had torn the rock face. The water was muddied and slower, strange pipes poking from the ground to divert flow. As he stood there, a distant howl echoed through the valley, chilling and raw. The wolf was near. Eli felt eyes on him and turned sharply. No animals in sight. Just shadows moving with the wind. At the tribal center, the children's safety became the top priority. Leela and the others were kept indoors, their parents anxious, but the kids whispered among themselves about the horse and the wolf, silent protectors watching from the trees. Eli knew their fears weren't just stories. The guardians had come back because the land was in danger, and this time, it wasn't just about balance, it was about survival. The night before a scheduled council vote on the land sale, the power went out across the reservation. Phones died, lights flickered. Panic spread as people gathered in candlelit rooms, uncertain what was happening. Outside, the sounds of the river rose unnaturally faster, louder, as if it was warning the people. Eli stood near the window, feeling the weight of the land's unrest. The guardians were restless, and so was the earth beneath them. When the council met the next day, the debate was fierce. Developers pressed for progress and profit. Tribal elders argued for protection and respect. Eli spoke last, his voice steady but fierce. This isn't just about land, it's about the water, the children, the future. The flood was a message, and if we ignore it, the guardians won't protect us next time. The room fell silent. The real threat was no longer hidden, it was here, and the fight for the land had only just begun. Eli and Jonas arrived at the ridge just as the sky darkened with heavy clouds, the threat of another storm thick in the air. The developers' trucks were lined up along the dirt road, engines idling, but faces tense. Men in suits clustered around orange cones, nervously scanning the tree line. Eli's voice was calm but firm as he stepped forward. You need to leave now. This land isn't yours to sell. Jonas stood beside him, eyes sharp, ready. Behind them, more tribal members emerged from the woods, their presence steady and resolute. The lead developer laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed strangely in the growing wind. We have permits, he said, waving a sheaf of papers. Legal rights. You can't stop progress. Eli shook his head, voice rising with conviction. You can't buy what you don't understand. This land has guardians. The crowd shifted uneasily as distant thunder rumbled, branches swaying. Phones were raised everywhere, capturing every tense word, every glare exchanged. The atmosphere was electric, raw with anticipation. Suddenly, a deep snort cut through the murmurs. From the ridge above, the black horse appeared, muscles rippling, beneath a soaked coat, eyes gleaming like molten onyx. It pawed the ground, nostrils flaring against the rising wind. Moments later, a low growl echoed behind it. The wolf stepped out from the shadows, no longer silent or still, but standing tall, chest heaving, its yellow eyes locked on the developers. Then the howl came long, fierce, and primal, a call that stirred the trees and sent shivers down every spine. From the ridge, other wolves answered the call, their howls weaving together like a dark symphony. Their silhouettes appeared one by one between the trees, eyes reflecting lightning flashes. The developers stumbled back, faces pale. Phones captured the entire scene. Animals that seemed more myth than real. Guardians come alive. One suited man dropped his phone. Others whispered nervously. The tension snapped, and panic set in. Trucks roared to life, tires spinning in the wet dirt as they scrambled to retreat. Eli watched the chaos unfold with a mix of relief and sorrow. This was what the Guardians had warned about, not just the land, but the people, the balance itself. As the developers fled down the ridge, some shouted threats that were swallowed by the storm. Others turned back once more to glimpse the horse standing proud, the wolf watching over the ridge like a sentinel. Tribal members cheered softly, some wiping tears. It was a victory, but fragile, born of fear and something older than all of them. The storm broke moments later, rain lashing down in sheets as lightning split the sky. The horse and wolf disappeared into the swirling mist, leaving the ridge empty but alive with power. The tribe gathered close, voices low and reverent. They had faced the invaders and stood their ground, but the land was still healing. Still, watching Eli and Jonas exchanged a look of tired determination. The fight was far from over, but tonight, the Guardians had won. As the rain soaked through their clothes, the community lit fires near the riverbank. Stories of the horse and wolf spread quickly, weaving into new legends for a new generation. Children stayed close to their elders, their eyes wide with awe and newfound respect. Eli felt a strange calm settle over him, as if the land itself had exhaled. He knew the Guardians would return again if needed, but for now, balance was held, fragile yet unbroken. The night settled into quiet, but the howl of the wolf lingered in the valley long after the storm. It was a reminder that some things could never be tamed or owned. The land spirit was alive and fierce, watching, waiting, and so were the Guardians, silent watchers of the ridge, protectors of the people. Eli whispered into the wind, "We're ready." Future was uncertain, but the past had taught them one thing: they were never alone. Leela sat cross-legged on the floor of the community center, a cluster of crayons scattered around her. Her small hands moved carefully across the page, eyes focused and serious beyond her years. The room hummed softly with quiet conversations and footsteps, but for her, the world had shrunk to the paper before her. Slowly, shapes took form: a powerful black horse, muscles tense and mane flowing, and beside it, a tall gray wolf, eyes glowing softly. Around them, a faint halo of light seemed to pulse a warmth on the paper. When she finished, Lila held the drawing up for Eli to see. He knelt beside her, his heart tightening at the familiar scene. "Who are they?" he asked quietly. Without hesitation, she replied, "They're not animals. They're watching us." Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of belief, not fear. The other children gathered closer, whispering among themselves, eyes wide as they nodded. Eli's gaze softened. In that moment, the innocence of a child pierced the darkness of years. The memory of the tribal elder's words came back to him, spoken decades ago in a smoke-filled room, heavy with cedar and sage. "Some spirits are sent to walk among us," the elder had said, "to warn, not to hurt." Eli had struggled to understand then, but now, the meaning was clear. These guardians weren't threats. They were protectors, messengers between the land and its people. They carried the burden of balance, and in their silence spoke volumes outside. The rain had softened to a gentle patter against the windows, washing away the tension of the days before. The community had begun to heal, coming together with renewed respect for the land and its mysteries. Yet Eli knew the peace was fragile. The drawing was a reminder watchers lingered in the shadows, eyes never closing, waiting for the next sign, the next call. And the children, with their quiet truths, were the first to see what many refused to believe. Lila's mother approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You see things others can't," she whispered, pride mixed with concern. Lila looked up, meeting Eli's eyes. "They're here because we forgot," she said, "but they haven't left." Eli swallowed hard, understanding that the Guardian's return wasn't just a warning, it was a chance for the community to remember, to protect, and to live in harmony once again. That night, Eli sat alone by the fire outside his ranch house, the drawing tucked carefully into his coat pocket. The flickering flames cast shadows that danced like ancient spirits on the walls. He thought of the pact made so long ago, the promises forgotten and now remembered through the eyes of a child. The Guardians had come back, not to punish, but to guide, and the future depended on listening to their silent WATCHFULNESS. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Eli felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The land was speaking, yes, but it was also forgiving. The horse and the wolf were not just memories or myths, they were the living pulse of a world older than any of them. And in the quiet light of morning, Eli vowed to honor that truth, to stand with the Guardians and the people who called this place home. The child's drawing remained pinned in the community center, a beacon for all who entered. Visitors paused, children pointed, and elders nodded knowingly. It was more than art, it was a message. The watchers were here, watching not with malice, but with hope. And as long as the people listened, the land would endure. Eli smiled faintly, knowing that in the heart of a child lay the key to healing everything they had nearly lost. The tribal council gathered under the wide sky, the air thick with anticipation and a solemn weight. The room was packed, families and community members filling every seat. The tension of weeks hung heavy, but today felt different. A quiet determination spread among the voices as the matter of the land came to the floor. Arguments had been heard, fears laid bare, but now clarity shone through the storm. The vote was unanimous. The river and surrounding lands were to be protected forever as sacred ground. Eli sat quietly as the final tally was read. When the council's decision was announced, a wave of relief swept through the room. He felt the eyes of the tribe settle on him, the unspoken invitation clear. Rising slowly, he pulled from his pocket the deed to his ranch acres bordering the river, the land he'd worked his whole life to hold on to. With a steady hand, he signed it over to the tribe, a promise etched in ink and spirit. The weight of years lifted, replaced by a quiet pride and a renewed sense of belonging. Outside, the sun broke through scattered clouds, casting golden light over the hills and the river's shimmering surface. Families stepped out together, faces softening in the warmth. Children ran freely, laughter echoing over the water. The land, once threatened, breathed easier now, wrapped in the protection of those who understood its true value. The elders blessed the ground with cedar smoke. Prayers whispered into the wind, carrying hopes for generations yet to come. Later, Eli walked to the riverbank alone, the cool water rushing past stones smoothed by time. His gaze swept the far ridge, where shadows gathered beneath tall pines. There, standing still and silent, was the black horse. Its coat glistened wet in the sunlight, eyes deep pools of ancient wisdom. Eli felt no fear, only reverence. The horse seemed to nod once, as if acknowledging the pact renewed, the balance restored. Then, without a sound, it stepped back into the forest's edge, disappearing among the trees. A soft rustle followed, and the gray wolf emerged beside the horse, its gaze sharp and watchful. The wolf's presence was commanding, a guardian of both wild and spirit. It lingered only a moment before turning to follow the horse deeper into the woods. The two moved together as one, silent, unseen, a living testament to the land's resilience and the bond between its protectors and people. Eli watched until the last glimpse vanished behind the leafy canopy that as twilight settled. The river reflected a sky painted with stars. The community gathered once more for a final ceremony, a circle of light and song to honor the decision and the land. Stories were shared, old and new, weaving threads of hope and history. Eli felt the pulse of his ancestors and the promise of the future merging in the firelight. This was more than a victory. It was a sacred trust, one that he vowed to uphold as long as he drew breath in the quiet moments before sleep. Eli stood on his porch, the sounds of the night wrapping around him like a comforting cloak. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled a call both mournful and proud. He smiled, knowing the guardians were still near, watching over the land, the children, and the people who had chosen to listen. The past was never really gone. It lived in every tree, every river bend, and in the silent watchfulness of a horse and a wolf. With the dawn yet to come, Eli closed his eyes and breathed deep, the crisp air filling his lungs. The fight was over, but the journey was just beginning. The land was safe, sacred, and alive. And so was the promise that no matter what storms might come, the guardians would return, forever watching, forever protecting. Years had passed since the storm and the battle for the land, but the river remained alive with memory. The children who had once played along its banks were now adults, some with children of their own. They returned one warm afternoon, walking the familiar paths lined with wildflowers and tall grasses. A new plaque stood near the river's edge, gleaming softly in the sun, to the guardians of the river, horse and wolf. It was a simple tribute, yet heavy with meaning that words alone could not capture. The group gathered around the plaque, voices low as they shared memories of that fateful day. They spoke of the flood's sudden fury, the black horse plunging into the roaring water, and the silent wolf watching from the ridge. Some recalled how the animals seemed almost otherworldly, as if the land itself had sent its protectors. Others listened, skeptical but respectful, feeling the weight of a story that was both legend and truth. The river whispered beside them, carrying their voices downstream. Eli, older now and slower in his steps, stood apart, watching the younger generation. He remembered the pact made long ago and the promise renewed with sweat and tears. The guardians that had come when they were needed most, then vanished like mist. No one had seen the horse or the wolf since that night, but their presence lingered in every rustle of the trees and every ripple of the river. The land remembered what the people sometimes forgot. Some villagers said the horse and wolf were nothing more than nature's wonders, wild animals instinctively protecting their home. But the elders knew better. They whispered of ancient bonds between the land and its guardians, of spirits woven into the soil and the sky. To them, the creatures were alive with purpose, sentinels watching in silence, returning only when the balance was threatened. The river was sacred, its protectors eternal. Lila, now a young woman with her own children, knelt by the water, tracing the patterns of light on the stones. She told her children the story passed down by her grandfather, and Eli the story of guardians who saved their ancestors and protected the land. Her voice was steady, full of reverence and hope. The children listened, wide-eyed, believing, because some truths live beyond sight, carried in the heart and in the land itself. Eli approached the plaque, running his fingers along its cool surface. He felt a connection to all who had come before, and all who would come after. The river had witnessed pain and healing, loss and renewal. It was a living thread, binding past and future. The guardians had returned once to remind them all of their duty, and the land had accepted their vow. He smiled quietly, grateful for the chance to stand on sacred ground. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the river, the community gathered for a small ceremony. Songs rose into the evening air, a blend of old chants and new voices. Flames flickered in drums' rhythm, hearts beating in unison. The story of the horse and wolf was no longer just a tale. It was a promise, a bond that transcended time and fear. It was a call to respect the land, to protect it fiercely, as it protected them long after the last fire flickered out. The river continued to flow, carrying stories and secrets beneath its surface, and somewhere in the wild spaces beyond, a black horse and a gray wolf watched silently, guardians forever, waiting patiently for the next time they would be needed. The land remembered, and so did the people, forever intertwined, forever alive.